What is up, folks? And welcome to episode 5 of the Digital Dopamine podcast. Today's subject is tokenization, and we'll dive right in. Tokenization has become one of the new buzzwords in the world of finance. So, your 401k may already be invested in assets you've never heard of through technology you don't understand. And the people making those decisions didn't ask for your permission. So there's a lot of people who barely know about the blockchain, let alone tokenization. And the blockchain, or I shouldn't call it the blockchain, but blockchain has been around before cryptocurrency was a thing. And tokenization is just an extension of digital assets. So I feel like I should go over both just a little bit so you can get a little bit of context on what exactly blockchain is and what exactly tokenization is. So a blockchain is a digital ledger, which is a record keeping system that stores information across a network of computers rather than in a single centralized database. So think of this as a shared spreadsheet that thousands of computers maintain simultaneously, where every entry is permanent, it's time stamped, and it's visible to the participants on the network. So, some key features with blockchain are decentralization, which is one of the bigger and I would say most beneficial features of blockchain. So, no single institution, so no bank, government, or company controls the ledger. It's maintained by a distributed network of computers called nodes. It's immutable. So once a transaction is recorded, it cannot be altered or deleted. Every entry is cryptographically linked to the one before it, forming a chain of blocks, hence the name blockchain. Transparency is another feature where it's on public blockchains. Every transaction is visible to anyone who looks on one of these ledgers, and there's explorers out there for each blockchain, or I should say each technology that's created on the blockchain. So Bitcoin has its own explorer, Ethereum has its own explorer, Solana has its own explorer. So on and on and on, so on and so on and so on. So this feature is for accountability, but also a concern for privacy since financial activity becomes traceable. And some people might not want their financial activity available to the public. And then the last one I have noted here is smart contracts. So blockchains can execute automated agreements, which is just code that says if X happens, then do Y. So for example, a smart contract could automatically distribute rental income to token holders every month without a human intermediary. And those are just a few of the benefits, or I would say a few of the features of blockchain. There are plenty other features of blockchain, plenty of other benefits for blockchain, but there's also, again, some concerns with blockchain. So I highly recommend diving deep into it if you're curious to learn a little bit more about blockchain itself. Now we move on to tokenization. So tokenization is the process of creating a digital token on a blockchain that represents ownership of real world assets like real estate, art, or stocks, as well as tangible assets such as intellectual property or voting rights. Now you can see where this can get a little tricky when it comes to like the voting rights and stuff, and how there's a lot of censorship. There's an attempt of a lot of censorship happening for this upcoming midterm election. And with the SAVE Act and all the other efforts being put forth from our government to try to suppress voters from actually being able to get that out and vote easily and making things a lot harder for them, this could be a huge concern for people when their voting rights, or I should say their availability to vote, is tokenized. Now, tokenization enables easier asset transfer, so that's a benefit, ownership verification, and fractional ownership. So imagine a commercial building worth $10 million. And traditionally, you'd need millions of dollars and a team of lawyers to buy it, possibly needing to go in and get a loan as well if you don't have the full amount of money to buy that property. But with tokenization, the building's ownership can be divided into 10 million tokens worth $1 each, and investors, big or small, could buy tokens to invest in that property. So an investor can buy 100 tokens worth $100 and own a tiny fraction of that building, receiving proportional rental income and being able to sell those tokens on a digital marketplace whenever they want. Now, this may sound like a scenario where the average Jamal, and I'm going to be saying Jamal, I don't want to say average Joe, I'm switching it up, where the average Jamal has a seat at the big dog table. But that fractional piece of ownership will never outweigh the millions or billions of dollars that the elite will put in all at once, maybe even taking ownership of all the available tokens for that digital asset themselves. So it might sound like there is accessibility being had when it comes to tokenizing these assets, but again, I can see how it can still be exploited by the elite and the ultra wealthy. So how tokenization connects to real world assets: a piece of real estate, a corporate loan, a treasury bond, shares in an ETF, etc. A legal structure is created that ties these digital tokens to legal ownership rights over the asset. This is a critical and often fragile link because the token is only as good as the legal framework backing it. Now, tokens are then used on the blockchain where they can be bought, sold, held, or used as collateral 24 hours a day across borders without traditional intermediaries like brokers or clearinghouses. But this presents its own issues when it comes to cyber criminals and hacking. And last but not least, smart contracts automate functions like interest payments, dividend distributions, and compliance checks, as well as transfer restrictions. But what is being tokenized right now, you might ask? So a few things that are in the process or have already been put in motion of being tokenized are U.S. Treasuries and money market funds. So at the moment, we have about $12 billion tokenized in money market funds and treasuries, led by BlackRock's BUIDL fund and JP Morgan's MONY fund. So you can see where the accumulation of these tokenized assets are already being sucked up by these big players in the game already. That has a chokehold on our normal financial system and society. And you have private credit, which we have $9 billion tokenized in private credit already. And I'm going to get a little deeper into the concerns that I have and a lot of people have when it comes to private credit in general. We also have real estate, commercial and residential properties fractionalized for smaller investors. So we can go into who's leading the financial tokenization charge. Like I mentioned earlier, tokenization converts ownership of physical and financial assets into digital tokens on the blockchain, real estate, loans, treasury bonds, ETFs. And we have big players like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Franklin Templeton, and Apollo Global Management leading this charge. The tokenized real-world asset market surpassed a staggering $26 billion by early 2026, which is a fourfold increase from early 2025, with private credit and U.S. Treasuries dominating that big pot of money. The private credit problem that is emerging now: large lenders like BlackRock, Blue Owl, and JP Morgan, as I mentioned, have restricted investor withdrawals from private credit funds amid rising interest rates and borrower distress. So businesses that took on these loans are struggling to service their debt. And what most people don't know is that tokenization is being positioned as a solution to this. The plan is to create secondary markets for these illiquid loans, fractionalize them, and potentially offload the risk to a broader pool of investors, the everyday person, the everyday investor. Some might call this genuine innovation in the digital landscape of finance, but I call it transferring risk from institutional balances to less sophisticated investors like you and I. The private credit market is sitting on a staggering $3 trillion, and investors want out of it because they see the cracks in a lot of these companies that took out these loans, and the interest rates are increasing and they're having a hard time paying them back. So the big time investors don't want to risk losing their profits that they were able to gain over the last handful of years. With investors wanting out, this could lead to major ripple effects in the broader markets. Now, I can go deep into a rabbit hole on the issue with the private credit market alone, but I want to stick to our focus for this episode, which is tokenization of all these connected issues. So it's not just private credit, but we can move past private credit a little bit. It is something that you should definitely dive into because it's going to be a big issue over the remaining days we have in 2026. Now, I want to shift to the 401k pipeline that I believe is another risk. Again, it's going to tie back to private credit for a little bit, but the main thing I want to touch on is back in August 2025, President Trump signed an executive order directing the Department of Labor to open 401k plans to alternative investments, including private equity and private credit, as well as digital assets, essentially just giving America's $13.9 trillion in defined contribution retirement plans to private asset giants like Apollo, Blackstone, and BlackRock. Target date funds were where most workers' 401k money sits by default, were designed for daily liquidity, transparency, and public markets. They were never built to house illiquid private credit or gated real estate. As one longtime fiduciary advisor put it, this quiet push isn't democratization, it's risk transfer. A lot of workers typically have little or no say to how their plan providers allocate these funds. The risks are substantial on multiple fronts. You have higher fees than traditional index funds. The money is locked up for years, and it's less transparent in terms of knowing which companies took out these risky loans. And there's no guarantee of performance from these riskier loans. They might say you can get a higher return, but there's not enough history and not enough data to back that up. Legal experts warn that many plan committees lack the expertise to evaluate private market investments, and attorneys are already watching for ERISA violations, ERISA being the 1974 federal law specifically designed to protect workers in retirement plans like these. Now, with all of that aside, the biggest issue that I think when it comes to tokenization is the security problem. And tokenization's promise depends entirely on the security of the systems holding these assets. And right now, those systems are under siege from every direction. Nation states, organized crime, AI-powered scam operations, and even physical violence. So on the state-sponsored theft problem, North Korea being one of the biggest proponents to this problem. North Korean hackers operating under the umbrella group known as Lazarus Group stole $2.02 billion in cryptocurrency in 2025 alone, which is a 51 increase from the prior year and their all-time record. Now, their cumulative total exceeds 6.75 billion. The single largest heist was back in February 2025. It was a Bybit hack where the hack resulted in $1.5 billion in Ethereum being stolen by compromising a third-party wallet provider's developer through social engineering. The FBI formally attributed the attack to North Korea's Trader Unit. Now that's TRADER and then TRAITOR unit. So what makes this especially relevant to tokenization is that these hacks or these hackers aren't breaking the blockchain itself. They're targeting the human and operational layers around it, the developers, the wallet software, and the interfaces people actually use while working with these, while working within the blockchain. Now, when real world assets like treasury bonds, real estate, and private credit are tokenized and held in similar infrastructure, the attack surface for nation state hackers grows enormously. We're no longer talking about stolen cryptocurrency alone. We're talking about the potential theft or manipulation of tokenized deeds, loan obligations, and retirement fund shares. North Korea is the only country in the world known to use state-sponsored hacking primarily for financial gain. I'm sure there are other countries out there that do the same thing, but they don't boast about it like North Korea does. And with North Korea specifically, these proceeds fund their nuclear and missile programs. A senior Biden administration official estimated that roughly 50% of North Korea's foreign currency earnings come from cybercrime. Now, just think about your 401k assets becoming tokenized on the same kind of infrastructure that these hackers are already systematically exploiting. The risk will no longer be theoretical, the risk would be immediate. And that's not the only issue when it comes to tokenizing these assets. AI is becoming embedded in everything. It's becoming more of a security risk for our everyday lives today, as you all might know. So that's without even considering tokenization. Crypto scams have been a problem since the inception of crypto, but there are scams with everything. And it's just important for people to understand how to protect themselves with these scams and be a little bit more cautious when you're getting into the crypto industry or working with blockchain. Now, crypto scam losses hit an estimated 17 billion in 2025, according to Chainalysis. These AI-powered scams using deepfake video calls, clone executive voices, and automated social engineering extracted 4.5 times more money than traditional scams. Impersonation scams surged 1,400% year over year. One investor in particular lost $284 million in a single phishing attack after scammers impersonated the hardware wallet support staff. As tokenized assets become more mainstream, these same techniques will be weaponized against retail investors, plan administrators, and the platforms managing tokenized 401k assets. Imagine AI-generated deepfakes impersonating your retirement plan administrator, or phishing campaigns targeting the custodians holding tokenized private credit. The technology for these attacks already exists and is being used at industrial scale. And then that leads us to the physical violence that is coming about when it comes to the issues with the security problem of tokenized assets. And I don't think enough people are aware of the amount of physical violence that has been happening across the world, not just in the US, but I learned a lot about these physical attacks recently, and I didn't know it was this bad. And they're called wrench attacks. As crypto values have risen and adoption has spread, criminals have increasingly turned to physical violence to steal digital assets. In 2025, verified physical attacks on crypto holders surged 75% year over year. That's kidnappings, home invasions, armed robbery, and even torture. In one Canadian case, a family was held hostage overnight, waterboarded, and essayed for their Bitcoin, which is crazy. In France, the co-founder of crypto wallet company Ledger, which is a cold wallet that I own, it's a great company, but the co-founder of that crypto wallet company, Ledger, had his fingers severed by kidnappers demanding ransom. Another case, a crypto entrepreneur and his wife were murdered in the UAE during a staged business meeting. So these are just some of the higher end instances of rent attacks. And these aren't isolated events. Security firm TRM Labs documented roughly 60 reported physical assaults on crypto holders in 2025. And the actual number is likely significantly higher since many go unreported. Organized crime groups are outsourcing violence to local gangs. And it's not just the crypto millionaires, but like teachers, construction workers, firefighters, anybody who might have gotten into crypto at a good time and have a decent amount of money in crypto, they're getting targeted. And anyone whose crypto holdings become visible are prime targets for that. And most crypto holdings are visible. And it just takes time to connect that wallet to the wallet holder. And if you have enough money in one wallet, there are going to be crime organizations and gangs doing the time to trace that back to you to rob you or to kidnap you and demand ransom. So as tokenization expands and more people hold digital representations of the real world assets, the risk of physical targeting will grow alongside it. KYC databases that link real identities to wallet addresses, crypto ATMs, and regulated exchange accounts all create new vulnerabilities if breached. And I think that is going to be one of the main concerns for people getting into cryptocurrency and when it comes to tokenizing your assets, because yeah, you might have your deed tokenized and then you can get kidnapped and have that whole held for ransom and be held for ransom to try to transfer the ownership of that deed to the criminal. The problem is just increasingly a little scary, not gonna lie. And hopefully we have regulations and security practices put in place. I should say new security practices put in place to help mitigate a lot of this cybercrime and a lot of the physical violence attacks. More on the security issue with tokenization, we can touch on quantum computing. And we don't really have to worry about this too much right now. Current blockchain security depends on mathematical problems that are impossible for today's computers to solve. And a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could theoretically derive private keys from public keys, enabling signature forgery and asset theft. Blockchain developers are working on post-quantum cryptography, and NIST has already standardized new signature schemes, but the transition will be slow and complex, and tokenized assets sitting on blockchains that haven't migrated to quantum-resistant cryptography will be vulnerable. An IBM study estimated that quantum computing could compromise up to 40% of current cryptographic systems without preparation. And I'm assuming that this will get resolved, because if we have quantum computing becoming more and more developed, and once we get to like a launch of true quantum computing, the blockchain developers, I would assume, if they don't want their company to go up in flames, will be working alongside these companies that have built quantum computing to do quantum resistance, to do quantum resistant cryptography. And that leads us to the last part of my security concern, which is like the institutional trust gap. A recent survey of asset managers found that nearly half who don't, around 48%, who don't yet offer tokenized funds ranked cybersecurity resilience as their single top concern. So among asset owners, 63% selected cybersecurity as one of their most important criteria for choosing a tokenized service provider. And the fundamental tension, blockchain's immutability, the very feature that makes it trustworthy, becomes a liability when a breach occurs. Unlike in traditional finance, reversing or correcting a fraudulent transaction on a blockchain is far more complex and in many cases impossible. A bad loan on paper can be restructured. A stolen token is usually gone for good. If the financial industry is going to tokenize trillions of dollars in assets, including the retirement savings of millions of ordinary workers, the security infrastructure needs to be built to a standard that doesn't yet exist. And until it does, every tokenized asset sitting on these systems carries a risk that most investors will never be told about in the first place. Now, we can move down that rabbit hole even further. There's other security risks that we could bring up when it comes to tokenized assets, but I wanted to move to the US dollar and stablecoins and touch on the debt problem a little bit and how the government is saying they want to use stablecoins to devalue the dollar so they can mitigate the interest payments that we are paying every single year in for the national debt. So stablecoins and the Genius Act. The broader monetary backdrop and the huge issue with our national debt is something that I think should be reported on more frequently. President Trump banned federal CBDC development in January of 2025, but simultaneously, the administration championed private stablecoins via the Genius Act, signed into law in July 2025. Stablecoins are private digital currencies pegged to the dollar and typically backed by US treasuries and in some cases commodities, depending on what stablecoin technology we're talking about. I know Tether is not just backed by treasuries, they do buy commodities and other physical assets to back their one-to-one stablecoin. Now, stablecoins, they've surged to a $312 billion market. And let's not forget, way back when, I won't say way back when, but 5 years ago seems like a long time ago, Trump called Bitcoin a scam and a disaster waiting to happen on national television in 2021. He said crypto was based on thin air. Then, once he realized that there was money to be made, NFTs in 2022 popped up for him. He had $1 million plus in Ethereum by 2024 and a Trump meme coin in January 2025. He did a complete 180 and declared himself the crypto president. If there's a scam to be made, let the biggest scammer of our time join the party. Now, when this same administration bans government issued digital dollars while signing the Genius Act to hand the digital payment infrastructure to private stablecoin companies, you have to ask, who is this really for? Now, that's a rhetorical question. We know who it's for. It's the elite and the billionaires of this country trying to scheme again to take and hoard money for themselves and not allow the average person to succeed in any new emerging technologies and emerging, I would say, legislation that's being put in place. The ban was framed as protecting Americans from government surveillance, but the practical effect is that the dollar is going to be digital regardless. The only question is whether public accountability or private profit drives it, which is the problem. Like if we're going to do the stablecoin situation, then why ban the CBDC? That would have been more of a public ledger for people to be able to trace and fight against corruption when it came to the CBDC, or I would say not maybe not fight the corruption, but voice their concerns. Just to be clear, scammers are in most industries, and crypto is not a special place where only scammers benefit. There are good actors and great technologies within the space, plus there's great services within the industry as well that have been overshadowed by scammers for quite some time, pretty much since cryptocurrency became mainstream. A good company that I think people should look into is Stellar, or I should say a good technology that people should look into is Stellar. And they have allowed for businesses building on top of the Stellar blockchain to do remittance a lot more efficiently than remittance is done today. It's very expensive to send money from here to another country where a family member might live, but when it comes to doing it through Stellar's, through companies that built upon Stellar's blockchain, it's a lot cheaper, and settlement is damn near instant. So they can get that money that they need a lot quicker than today's traditional ways of sending money across the border. Now, we also have to understand that the dollar is getting weaker and weaker as our debt grows substantially. And folks want to act as if the dollar dominance will last forever, but we need to give up on that pipe dream. Empires don't last forever, especially when the people who control the money and legislation creation continue to exploit anyone who isn't in that top 1% of wealthy individuals. Capitalism, in a lot of ways, is cannibalistic, and it does not have a place in a sound society today. Back in the day, capitalism might have been worthwhile. Some might argue against it. I kind of argue against it back in the day. I do see that it wasn't as exploited as it is today and as egregious as it is today, but capitalism is what built America on the backs of my ancestors, on the backs of black ancestors, because the cotton industry was a big proponent in America becoming America today. So won't dive too deep into history here, but that is something that people should understand and understand what capitalism has done and how it has evolved into something very, very cannibalistic, even though it was before. So it's also worth noting, before moving on to the debt problem that we have, that the Senate voted 89-10 this month, March 2026, to extend the ban on government issued digital dollars through at least 2030. However, Washington is still backing private stablecoins, and the ban extension, which was included in the Road to Housing Act bill, is still not signed into law. So no one knows if the extension will actually become a reality. Now, for this debt problem, hear me when I say this. $39 trillion. We just surpassed $39 trillion in national debt. And our interest payments are $900 billion, give or take, a year. And who's footing that bill? Us, the taxpayers. It's insane and it's mind-boggling that we continue to exponentially grow the national debt with no end in sight of it getting better, because you have two options, two main options that they can move forward with. One is actually reducing the spending that we do every year, and it will be reducing that military spending that has gotten to close to $1 trillion, which is insane to spend on the military. We can reduce that spending, or inflation. When we print more money, anybody sitting in the seat to make the decision doesn't want to do either of those options because it will cause pain. I shouldn't say either of those options will cause pain, but this latter option, in terms of raising taxes and having inflation happen, and while they're printing money, that's going to cause pain. But doing the first option, which is reducing our spending, that's going to cause pain to the military industrial complex. And they have too much money put into their businesses plus their lobbying efforts to let that happen. So the strategic logic here is clear as day to me. Widespread stablecoin adoption creates artificial demand for U.S. Treasury securities, helping the government service its enormous national debt by pushing borrowing costs down. Stephen Myron, a former top economic advisor to Trump and now a Federal Reserve Committee member, has argued stablecoins could lower interest rates by as much as zero point 0.4 percentage points. But critics argue this amounts to privatizing the monetary system, handing the infrastructure of digital payments to private companies like Tether or Circle, face far less oversights than banks, while also creating a parallel financial layer where instability could cascade into the real economy. Leading economist Adam Posen of the Peterson Institute has warned that he is fundamentally very worried about financial stability in the United States, as we all should be, citing stablecoin issuers' insufficient regulation, potential cross-selling of risky crypto products, and the danger of a run if trust collapses. The dollar fell 9% in 2025, its worst year since 2017, driven by Fed cuts, tariff chaos, and broader uncertainty about the U.S. economic management. If stablecoins or tokenized products destabilize, the ripple effects could reach the savings and retirement accounts of millions who never chose to be exposed to these investments. Whether through a CBDC or stablecoins, the risk to savers is similar. If the underlying monetary system is being restructured to service national debt rather than protect purchasing power, the people holding dollars in saving accounts, in 401ks, and in paychecks are the ones who absorb this cost. The average person gets left holding the bag, like typically in this country. Constantly, the average Jamal is the one having to pay the cost for these reckless changes and these greedy changes that our government officials and institutions decide to move forward with. I want to be annoyingly clear about this. The people most at risk are those the least involved in this decision making. Workers whose 401k providers quietly allocate their retirement savings into private credit and alternative assets without meaningful disclosure, and savers whose purchasing power deteriorates as the dollar weakens and monetary policy contorts to service national debt. I mean, who the hell out there reads crypto white papers other than nerds like me? And even I have only read a few of them from start to finish. The shit is overwhelming at times. And a lot of these crypto white papers have a lot of jargon in them that most people will not understand in the first place. So your average person or investor or worker does not monitor blockchain ledgers. They just expect their retirement to be there when they need it or when they're ready to cash out. So a lot of this is important to know now rather than trying to learn about it when it is in effect. The promise of tokenization is real in theory. Lower costs, faster settlement, broader access, greater transparency. But the crucial issue is who benefits and who bears the risk of tokenizing assets. When major financial institutions tokenize their private credit portfolios, they gain liquidity and new distribution channels. When those tokenized products get funneled into workers' 401ks through target date funds, the risk is silently transferred to people who never asked for exposure to speculative, illiquid, and complex assets. And these are the same people who most likely won't know they have it in the first place. Tokenization doesn't eliminate the underlying risk of an asset. A bad loan is still a bad loan, whether it's on paper or on the blockchain. What tokenization does is make the loan easier to slice up, repackage, and sell to someone else. If this sounds familiar and worrisome, it should be because it echoes the same mortgage-backed securities that fueled the 2008 financial crisis, where complex instruments were distributed widely before anyone fully understood the risk embedded in them. The difference this time is that the packaging is digital, the plumbing is blockchain, and the people holding the bag, us, may not even know what a token even is. So hopefully you learned a little bit today. Hopefully this piques your interest to dive into the world of tokenization and our move to tokenize a lot of things. And I'm praying that people are prepared and doing their due diligence to have to deal with this, because I don't think it's going to not happen. I think it is going to happen whether we, the average worker, wants it to or not. And it's better to be prepared for when that happens than, again, getting left holding the bag. Appreciate y'all joining. And again, hopefully y'all learned a little bit today. Until next time, peace.